Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time and inform the most relevant, compelling, and challenging conversations. Here we offer first-person access to dynamic political, business, and public personality.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shazan Chu, and I'm an executive member of Canadian Club Toronto. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and cultures. We are grateful for the opportunity to be able to come together to learn on this land. Guests, thank you for joining us today. And thank you to our AV supplier, VVC Live, for making it possible for us to gather virtually today. Starting a life in a new country comes with many challenges, navigating a new financial system being one of them. Today, in recognition of Financial Literacy Month, our panelists will address the unique and complex barriers that newcomers face when trying to establish a financial foundation in Canada and some of the solutions that are available. We hope that employers, marketers, nonprofit service providers, and government registered today will take action to engage in the financial health and literacy of Canadian newcomers and hearing from this gifted panel. Just before we begin, I want to review a few housekeeping instructions. Please take note of the following. To ask a question, click the question tab on the right-hand side of the video player. These will be sent to the moderator. The help button located in the bottom right corner of the page is for technical support. I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Easy Financial, for helping to make this event possible. And thank you to our seasoned sponsor, Canadian Bankers Association, for its continuing support. The Canadian Club is a nonprofit, and we have been gathering people together for 125 years. It is because of our sponsors, partners, and members that we are able to do so. Thank you for your support. Now, to introduce today's speakers. Margaret Adekunle, CEO and founder of City Living Centers. Tonie Chaltas, CEO of ACHÄV. Misha Esipov, CEO and founder of Nova Credit. And Jason Mullins, President and CEO, goeasy Limited. Today's discussion will be moderated by Bruce Sellery, CBC Money columnist, CEO of Credit Canada, and past president of Canadian Club Toronto. A tradition that our club maintains is the toast we make to our country. So if you have a beverage close by, please join me in a toast to Canada.
To Canada.
Canada. Bruce, over to you.
Thank you very much. Financial Literacy Month. Financial Literacy Month is like Carabana, TIFF, FIFA World Cup, Luminato, Nuit Blanche, and the ICC Cricket World Cup all rolled into one, celebrated every single November. It's a really big deal. It's a really, really big deal. And this year, the focus of our event with the Canadian Club is on newcomers to Canada. Newcomers to Canada. How do we foster financial well-being with newcomers to Canada? And I think in this group, at least, there is a shared belief in the view that newcomers have been an enormously important part of the history of this country, and they are an enormously important part of the future of this country. So it behooves us all to ensure that we welcome them and that we support their integration with the knowledge and the institutions and the behaviors that will serve them and therefore our country. We have assembled a really extraordinary panel that brings together different work experiences, different perspectives, for-profit, nonprofit, big company, small company, and we're going to highlight both some of the barriers that newcomers face, and also many of the opportunities for individuals, for institutions, and for our government in how to make this a more effective part in how we bring Canadians into our culture. Margaret is our first panelist. And just by way of introduction, Margaret's based in Edmonton, Alberta. Hello, Alberta. And Margaret, you have many things that you bring to this conversation. Of course, your work in the credit industry, your grassroots work that you do in your nonprofit, but you also have lived experience. You arrived from Nigeria 23 years ago. Paint us the picture of what those first few days were like for you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you, everyone. It's nice to meet you, Tonie and Misha. I came 23 years ago, like you said, and it was tough. You're coming to a new country, leaving everything you know behind, your family, your culture, food, everything you know. And I remember that I had to be in the shelter for a bit because I didn't know anyone here. So I was in the shelter for a bit. Thank God to Canada for having such resources for us. After being in the shelter for a bit, they actually helped me get my first little apartment on Danforth. So I used to live in Toronto, and that apartment was very tiny. It was $450, and I was getting $520 from the government at the time. So by the time I'm done paying my rent, I have practically nothing left or anything else.
What do you remember so first cash flow, wow. What do you remember was a formative experience for you in terms of learning about the Canadian financial system, some of which would have been quite different from what you've been raised in Nigeria?
So in Nigeria is a cash-based society. So is a lot of African countries. Cash-based society. I had no clue. I had never had a bank account in my life, and I was 23 years old. I never had a bank account. I lived at home all through. I had no clue. I've never heard about credit, and I still didn't hear about credit till like a few years after, I would say. I had no idea. I didn't understand it. I didn't know it. I only got personal expenses was going into RBC. I didn't understand what the account was about or how to use it. All I know was that I had an account. I didn't know if it had a fee or not. And I had a card to use in order to access. That's all I knew at the time.
Yeah. Misha, you are also someone with lived experience as an immigrant. Your current role, CEO of Nova Credit, you bring to this conversation a perspective of Canada versus US, which we're going to get into. What were your early days like? You came to the US a bit younger, is that right?
Yeah, I moved originally from the Soviet Union to the States when I was a kid, and like most people who move across national lines, you get faced with this reality of having to start over. You have to oftentimes learn a new language, retrain professionally, and reestablish your financial life. And you're doing that in an environment where you don't have the same social safety net that you may have had back in your home country. And so we've built a business and a product that helps make that period of transition and integration a lot easier. And I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit here today in the conversation.
If your parents were here and I were to ask them the question of what was formative for them about learning a new financial system, what do you think they would say? Or what did you hear around the dinner table when it came to finances?
Yeah, we weren't really talking about global credit bureaus around the dinner table.
No?
While growing
Okay.
up. Surprised now we do, maybe, but the anecdotes I still remember are how hard it was to get a car, actually. So when we first moved to the States, we moved to Syracuse, upstate New York, not too far from Canada, and you can't get around without a car, and we weren't able to get a car loan at all, and so we saved for many months before we could buy a used car all in cash, and that's sort of the story that I've heard time and time again now in my role, where we're talking to and working with newcomers every day.
Tonie, you're the CEO of ACHÄV. One of the really important parts of this conversation is to think holistically about the newcomer experience, which ACHÄV is very clearly able to provide that perspective, not only because you have over 100,000 clients, but also because you help newcomers in so many different ways. Tell us about the mission. What's ACHÄV about? What are you trying to do?
Thanks very much, Bruce. We're really all about creating faster paths to prosperity, making it easier for our clients to get the supports that they need to settle in their new country, learn a language, French or English, and get a job. And we also not only support newcomers, about 80% of our clients are newcomers. We support Ontarians as well. So helping those who are underemployed or unemployed get a job, and also provide free recruitment services to employers, helping them build a diverse, inclusive workplace.
One of the things that in our prior conversations you've talked about that has really stuck with me is how some of your clients literally show up on your doorstep, the doorstep of your offices, directly from the airport. So they haven't slept, they haven't bathed, they've got their suitcases with them, and they're showing up. You were the first port of call. Talk specifically about how you play the role as a navigator with some of these financial institutions in those very, very early days for people.
So we do have folks that actually do arrive, Bruce, you're right, with their suitcases. We have an office quite close to the airport. And as you can imagine, there is so much going on in their lives in those first several days. They often arrive in Canada having done a bit of research. So they will have either identified who they're going to bank with, or identified the need to very quickly affiliate with a financial institution if they don't already have something set up. So that's step one. It is often a big focus. And then very quickly, they're pivoting into, how do I get a job? But most importantly, how do I get a job that's actually commensurate with my skill level? They have saved, they arrive, and very quickly that money can start to disappear. We all know about the housing challenges here in Canada, and the reality of finding rental income that actually fits their budget is a challenge for newcomers. And when you've got landlords who are now asking for upwards of, in some cases, a year's worth of rent all at once in one check, that can take a big hit into somebody's savings. And you can imagine, none of us can quickly come up with $30,000 to write a check. So that's a big hurdle that they face right away, on top of simply figuring out how the best system works, how to get a health card, how to get their kids into school. There is an awful lot going on in their early days as they settle here in Canada. But
Jason, I want to bring you in here. Jason, President and CEO of goeasy. You've got two lenses here. A huge number of your clients are newcomers to Canada. A huge number of your employees are newcomers to Canada. And one of the things that you've talked about is how important it is to be, your word, purposeful in how you staff branches with new Canadians. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on today. I think it's really important that organizations that have a retail presence, as we do, we have 400 locations coast to coast, staff those locations with people that represent the communities within which you operate. That means that depending on the ethnicity of the communities in which we operate, we're looking for people who can most be relatable and connect with the people that are representative of the culture in that community. And that especially means being able to often speak the languages. Our financial services infrastructure and a lot of times the documents that are available by a lot of organizations for doing basic financial transactions have not caught up yet to the significant amount of new population growth from new Canadians in Canada. So they're not always available in all those languages. So if you can at least staff your locations with someone that represents those cultures and the mass diversity that exists in Canada, at least then you're going to be able to have people that are relatable and talking the same language.
I want to not take for granted the why we are having this conversation. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to talk about the opportunity that is here as it relates to newcomers. And Misha, I want to start with you. Your company's based in the US. You tried to enter Canada a bunch of years ago. You are now doing that work again, now coming back with guns a-blazing here with Nova Credit. Why is this a market that is appealing to you? And why do you think your service will make an impact for newcomers? Basically, I think we need to just lay on the table the economic case to be made that this is time well spent.
Certainly. Well, as a business that supports newcomers around the world, we have a business here in the US, in the UK, in the UAE, in Singapore, in Australia. We get this really unique view into how different economies and financial systems treat newcomers and help ease the integration path. One of the things that makes Canada so unique is over the next 20 years, Canada is expected to grow its population by about 12 to 14 million people. And 100% of the population growth is coming from newcomers. So there is no way to grow as a business in Canada unless you have a dedicated strategy for how to attract and retain newcomers. And core to our interest and entry into Canada is to really be the third credit bureau. So in Canada, you may be familiar, there are two traditional credit bureaus, but whenever somebody arrives in Canada, they arrive what's called credit invisible. There's no information about who this newcomer is. And so when that newcomer applies for a place to live, applies for a credit card, applies for a personal loan, applies for an auto loan, all of these various products and services that they need, the local Canadian credit bureaus don't have any information about who this customer is. And as a result of that, the newcomer gets rejected for that service. And so we're entering Canada as the third credit bureau. We are now licensed in every one of the major Canadian provinces as a CRA, and we can provide access to international credit bureau data. And so if you move to Canada from the US or the UK or India or Nigeria or Brazil or a few dozen countries now, we can access that newcomer's data from where they're from and instantly bring that into Canada so that they no longer have to start from scratch.
So if that's the sort of macro lens, this is a market that is growing, it's critically important. Tonie, I want to focus you on a micro element that I know is really important to you. And that is what you have seen in the data and anecdotally about the loyalty of newcomers when it comes to their engagement in the workforce. Talk a bit more about that for us.
Sure, Bruce. We often hear the term quick quit, and people believe that newcomers often make up a significant number of the population who start a job and then just quickly move on to something new. The reality is our experience at ACHÄV is quite different. These folks have, as I said earlier, a lot going on. They need stability, they need a job, and they are incredibly loyal and hardworking when they land. But a big piece of that is that actually the culture in which they're walking into is a welcoming one that is inclusive. So if it is welcoming, if their skills are being leveraged, they're staying, and they are incredibly valuable employees when they stay. Think about what they've gone through. They've left everything behind. These people are not risk adverse, and there's no such thing in the status quo for them. So they make fantastic employees.
We're going to talk about a number of the barriers, and then we're going to segue to some of the opportunities or solutions or ways to overcome those barriers. The first, which Tonie, you've really already started to highlight here, is the importance of a welcoming environment. Margaret, you talk about your early days in workplace culture, and you said to me once, I wish I was born here just so I would understand workplace politics. For someone who has been around my whole life, I've lived in Canada for most of my life, there's a nuance about workplace politics that I don't know that I already know. What did you observe as it relates to the unwritten code that took some time for you to have awareness about or learn?
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, for hiring a lot of immigrants and minority. I think it's amazing. In the work environment, Tonie nailed it, is the culture. You're coming from an environment where the culture is completely different. So what I often hear is when an immigrant is fired, is they are not a cultural fit. It's a brand new culture. We expect them to leave everything they've learned over the years and adapt automatically into that work environment. That's what I found with a few leaders. The patient level is a little bit thin as well. Again, to give kudos to a lot of people who are actually trying. I've met amazing leaders who are really trying to help these immigrants adapt. At the same time, I've come across a lot, and from the feedback that I'm getting from our foundation is that a lot of them get fired too pretty quickly within the first 3 to 6 months. And that's because of the cultural difference. It took me almost 20 years to adapt, right? And I worked in the banking industry for 21 years. And it took just one amazing Canadian lady to say, hey, Margaret, this is it. The fact that somebody gives you a hug and gives you coffee does not mean you guys are friends. Where we come from, you give me coffee, you give me a hug, we're best friends. But in the Canadian work environment is different. I recently had to deal with a situation with an immigrant who was hired into an amazing organization in HR. She met this individual and she went on to explain, talked about their age. Because the person asked her about her age, she felt comfortable to share more information. She shared a lot of personal information and she went on to ask, so how much are you paid? She asked about the person's salary. Where she's coming from, it was not a big deal. In that work environment, it was a big deal. She was performance managed for that. So for a lot of the immigrants is the cultural difference, is the opportunity to adapt, is finding that amazing leader that will say, hey, I will be patient with you. I will give you that opportunity to learn. So in my own experience, it took me a very long time because I was working in the bank. I was very aggressive. And what we learned is that the more aggressive you are, the more sales you make, the better. Nothing else matters. But in the Canadian work environment, it's different.
It's different. Jason, you talked about the number of retail locations. Your employees speak many, many different languages. They have many, many different nationalities. What's the hardest part for you as the leader and for your people in creating that welcoming environment for newcomers?
Yeah, so well, just to put it in perspective, we have about 2,400 employees. Almost 17% of them, over 400, are new Canadians. So they're actively employed with us as permanent residents and not full citizens yet. So it's a pretty big portion of our employee base. They represent over 72 different nationalities, so lots of languages spoken. So the most difficult thing, frankly, as a leader of the company is, as Margaret said, when they first join, they come from a very diverse set of backgrounds and experiences from many different employers across many different countries. So trying to build a culture in the company that welcomes and speaks and grabs the hearts and minds of people with so many different backgrounds is quite difficult. You run up against all kinds of interesting challenges, like what social issues around the world are you going to corporately speak up on and have a voice on versus not? And when you build your benefits and employee rewards, what are the various financial or health or family benefits that you want to build because they will cater to the widest audience possible? So if your employee base is more narrow and of a more similar nature, it's almost easier to deal with those things because you know exactly what's going to cater to that population. But when you've got people that come from so many different wide backgrounds, just building the right culture and knowing how to build your organization around what's going to best engage that workforce, it's tricky, it's difficult.
So barrier number one, welcoming environment, that assumes that you've been able to get the job in the first place. Tonie, I hosted a workplace show 15 years ago in which we did a series of stories on the challenge for newcomers to Canada being credentialed in this country. Where have we seen progress? Where are the barriers still most pronounced?
So the good news is we are starting to see a little bit of progress. We have a long way to go in recognizing foreign credentials. The governments are seized with it because I think there's a recognition that we have such a label crisis that we need to be able to match the skills of newcomers with the needs of business. So that's step one. But the second step is the colleges actually finding a way to reimagine credentialing processes that makes it faster, makes it easier, gets rid of the duplication of a lot of the steps along the way. And the other piece of this is the employers. So it's one thing to recognize that the colleges, the regulatory bodies have to move forward, governments need to reinforce. We need employers who also will recognize that without Canadian experience, these people still can be really valuable, and it may take them a while to get their credentials. So find something that is next door, find something that's close, can build on those skills, give them the flexibility to get through the process that they need. They're going to earn a living while they're doing this because most of them can't exit the workforce to just focus solely on building that process and getting those credentials. So it's a journey and we're making progress, but not fast enough.
Yeah, let's read through this book a little faster, please, everybody, if we could. Be great, be great. Misha, I want to come to you on one of the other challenges that I'm sure you see globally. I don't know, you tell me. And that is building trust in institutions. So newcomers come with probably limited understanding for who the 5 big banks are, what the credit union system is all about, how the CRA works, all those sorts of things. What are some of the things that you see globally that enable newcomers to trust the institutions and the players in which they in which they should have trust in?
I mean, if you peel back the onion, what like one of the reasons why integration and immigration is so hard is a data problem, right? It's you arrive as a blank slate. There's no information about who you are, and so many traditional onboarding experiences, so signing up for new products, break because you can't even verify your identity online, right? Because there's no record for who you are yet in Canada, and so you end up resorting to a variety of these like clunky experiences. You have to show up in a branch, you have to show up with all sorts of documentation to try to prove who you are, and core to why we exist is to automate a lot of that and to make that experience easier and a little bit more human and natural, and it's a capability that's now becoming the norm, at least here in the US and increasingly in the UK and a few other markets. In Canada, we publicly announced our launch this past summer, initially with Scotiabank, but our intent is to bring the capability and allow all major financial institutions in Canada to benefit from this capability, so that newcomers no longer have to start from scratch, so that they can benefit from their proven experience and get a leg up.
Margaret, you have very real, immediate, intimate stories of newcomers and the challenges that they face. One of the areas in which you hear a lot of stuff is around unscrupulous behavior, bordering on fraud. You have an example of a client who took out student loans for a school that didn't then lead to a job. Tell us what happened there and what some of the lessons are for all the listeners into this event to say, wait a sec, we've built a system that that is insufficient in protecting newcomers from scams and fraud.
There's a lot of praise out there paying on newcomers as well. There are little colleges, small colleges who go out of their way to apply for student loans for these individuals, maybe give them 2,000 thereabout to hold on to. They go to the school for maybe 6 months or so, they come out, they can't find a job because some of the courses they were learning aren't probably what they need. There are also a set of people. I had a new immigrant who bought pots for 8,000 because they were told the pots will hate their health. It boils down to information. It boils down to a lot of information. With what Misha was saying earlier on, City Learning Centers has a program, is a rent reporting service. We're also using that to help new immigrants build credit. We're getting the word out. We're letting them know you don't need this student loan from these fictitious schools. You don't need to buy a pot of 8,000 in order to have a loan that will appear on your credit, and you have to spend all these years paying it off. It's just getting the word out there. Similar to my situation, right? I got bad credit at one point because I didn't just understand, and I was working in the bank at the time. It's information, getting to them before the sprays get to them, impacting policies the best way we can, and conversations like this that we're having as well.
I want to then move to this, the next question, or the next barrier, is really around access to credit. So we know that it is so critical for newcomers to Canada to begin building that credit history and doing all the things that will establish a score for a whole host of reasons, not just so they can borrow, but so they can have something to show a landlord when they want to rent an apartment. Misha, you've talked a little bit about the role that Nova Credit plays. What are the biggest hurdles for this being ubiquitous? I can imagine there are some players who aren't so interested in a new upstart like yours coming in and changing the game, because there is currently a way things are done.
Yeah. Well, as much as I take a lot of pride in being an upstart or a startup, we've been at this for almost a decade at this point, and so not quite a spring chicken anymore. We've proven that we know how to work with the largest banks in the world: American Express, HSBC, Scotiabank, Republic About. We support telco use cases, and so we have a familiarity and an understanding that is no longer naive about what it means to do business with some of the largest banks in the world, including some of those in Canada. I mean, I'd love a world where we are, ubiquitously integrated and available in the Canadian market. It'll take some time to get there, but I think we're on the right track right now. We're getting a really warm welcome from all the major players that we're talking to, and we'll soon be more public about working with in Canada. But the biggest challenge ultimately comes down to believing that this data can help improve processes, that this data can help get more people into the Canadian financial system. And there are a variety of ways that we help partners understand the power of this data in pre-qualifying applicants and underwriting them and improving their line assignment, and a variety of other use cases for how credit data, just like any way that you'd work with the credit bureaus, can help improve process.
Tonie, I'm going to come to you in a second. I'm going to ask Jason one more question, then I'm going to come to you. And what I'm going to ask you in a second is, what have we missed here? We've gone through like the big barriers, but there may be one or two that we've missed. So I'm going to ask you that question in a second. Before I do that, Jason, I do want to ask your view on access to credit, because you have a challenge pricing risk. It's what the mathematicians who work with you are focused on day in, day out. And there must be a distinction between poor credit score, which has a certain profile and you price it in one way, versus no credit score, which is the circumstance that a lot of newcomers arrive with. How do you navigate that? How does that work?
Yeah, so first of all, it is difficult. And as a lender, the whole lending community are rooting for businesses like Misha's, because we are looking for more data upon which we can use to make better decisions and be able to make credit more readily and accessible and available to new Canadians, and price those loans at the appropriate credit risk based on the profile of those individuals. In the absence of that new information and data, it's really a case of extending credit typically based on one of three factors. And as a new Canadian, you're most likely going to have a trade-off because you have no credit file until the data that we need is more readily available. It's one of the three C's. It's either going to cost you more because you don't have known credit risk based on an established credit profile. You're going to have to provide collateral some sort of form of security. That could just be a cash, that could be an RSP, that could be a GIC, that could be a car if you have it. Or 3, you're going to have to get a co-applicant. It's either going to cost you more, you're going to have to provide collateral, or you're going to need a co-applicant, someone that's going to be able to sign on your behalf. And until the Canadian infrastructure catches up in our financial system with the right data and the right information to identify and assess the risk of these new Canadians, these are the trade-offs, unfortunately, that many of them will have to make in order to build that all-important initial start to building their credit file.
Tonie, what have we missed in terms of your top 5 on barriers for newcomers to Canada when it comes to the financial system?
I'll give you 2. First of all, I talked briefly, Canadian experience. We just have to get past this. I think it was Misha or maybe Jason who talked about the growth of our population. And the reality is, to build an employee base, employers are going to have no choice but to build from the base of newcomers, which means they're not coming with Canadian experience. So they need to start looking at skills, competencies, not just experiences. There is a great deal that is transferable, but they're going to have to take a bit of an open mind. And I will give the government of Ontario credit. They've made some good strides here. About a year ago, they got rid of it for professionally trained international workers coming. They removed the Canadian experience requirement. Government just announced last week that they will actually make it illegal to have job postings and applications that require Canadian experience. So I think that's a big step forward, but HR departments, employers are going to have to do a little bit more work to map what are those experiences and what do those skills actually look like that come with those experiences. Let's look for the skills. The other thing I'll talk about is the wage differential. The reality, first of all, is that 60+% of newcomers come to Canada with university educations. Depending on what stat you look at in Canada, Canadians have 50 to 60% population with university education. So they're coming in, and these folks are highly educated. But despite the fact that they have university degrees, they are twice as likely to be paid less. 20% wage gap has now been calculated for a low-skilled paid job here in the GTA between a non-immigrant and an immigrant. That's a dramatic difference. So I think those are 2 really big, important things, is pay people for the job that they can do, the skills that they bring, and get rid of Canadian experience. So important. Those are 2 big barriers.
Great. We are taking your questions through the platform upon which you were engaging in this event, and I just wanted to flag one of them. Jason, this goes to you. What are some options for Muslim immigrants when they try to work within a system when they cannot realize interest? So some people might not be familiar with the cultural differences here, but those who are of the Muslim faith, they can't just get a loan in the same way that someone who doesn't follow those principles because of that religious context. What are ways, Jason, in which you see the industry accommodating different cultures that may have some surprising things that aren't linguistic in nature, but they're broader than that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So 2 things that are now becoming more prevalent or are available to build credit with in Canada. One is most of the major telcos now report the telecommunications payment history on your cell phone and your cable bills to the credit reporting agencies. So if you're not going to go get a traditional interest-bearing product, go get a cell phone and get a post-paid cell phone plan. Now, again, it can be a bit of a chicken and an egg, because unfortunately, in some cases, those telcos will need a credit file, and you find these, folks are in this caught in this loophole. But a telco trade is a great way to do that. And then secondly, there are a number of emerging companies that are now allowing landlords to report rent payments to the credit file. So there are a growing number of landlords, and particularly the larger landlords that run multi-unit complexes. So when you're going and looking for a rental unit, look for one or ask, is there a way that you can have my rental payments reported to the credit file so that I can start to build credit as well? So we are getting to the point where there are new and more options emerging for how someone can build credit, even if they don't want to incur interest from a traditional credit product.
We're going to make an emphatic shift from the barriers to the opportunities that are available for the taking for institutions, for governments, for higher learning education, for us to be supportive of newcomers. And I'm going to be self-serving and flag one. So Credit Canada has just launched a series of e-learning modules focused on helping newcomers understand the credit system, understand the credit score, understand what to do if they're having a challenge with credit. creditcanada.com/newcomers. One of the things that is really important to highlight about this initiative is all this material is available in 8 different languages. So a newcomer is able to log in and engage with this e-learning in their language of choice. So that is one. We'll put that as an opportunity or a solution to some of the barriers out there, because we can't minimize the challenge it is for people to engage in a language that may not be their first. I want to move to you, Margaret. So you work at City Lending, but you also are very close to this grassroots kind of focus with the immigrant inclusive credit. What are some things that you are trying and have deemed to be effective in your work in that side of your very busy life?
We have, for the Muslim community, we do have a quick loan product where we don't charge interest rate. We only charge a fee. Is $1,600 and they have 3 months to pay back. That's one way we've been able to help that community out with that. We also directly report their rent payments to credit bureau. With just $5 a month, we're able to do that. And with the grassroots work that we do, for some of them that are not able to afford $5 a month, we pay that off on their behalf. One piece that I think we also need to look at, we're not doing that yet, is the newcomer packages from the banks. A lot of the new immigrants are settling down with those packages, $2,000 credit card, $5,000 line of credit, without a job yet. We're finding that a lot of them are getting back credit within the first year due to some of those packages, because they don't understand how to pay some of this money back immediately. Some of them don't even have a job. So they end up with city lending centers where we're fixing their credit for them because they got $5,000 from a particular bank when they came in and they weren't able to pay back on time, or they didn't understand the process. So I think a good opportunity is to look back at those newcomers packages and the kind of impact it's having, and to also revisit the lending policies.
Yeah. Misha, I want to include you here. Given your global view, you see a lot of the work that the institutions are doing prior to the newcomer arriving in this country. And a lot of the big banks in particular invest a huge amount of time, energy, and money in, I think there's part of it that's, let's make an impact with these folks. And part of it is we want to get them, locked in as a client before they're then hit with a barrage of marketing material from competitors. Talk a bit about the work that institutions are doing prior to a newcomer coming here to Canada.
Yeah, it's a great question. Something we're seeing really picking up steam the last few months and quarters. More and more of the major financial institutions in Canada are investing in what we call pre-arrival workflows. So this is standing up an organization and a team that's finding newcomers when they're still in their home country, let's say in India, building trust, allowing for account opening and onboarding prior to arrival, and then actually activating the account upon the newcomer showing up at a branch location in Canada. And so I really think about that as like almost like a new channel of acquisition that you can start to activate to create a little bit more ease and remove a little bit of anxiety about the migration path of, you arrive in Canada and you don't know whether you can even walk into a bank and open up an account. And this way, with greater confidence that you have an account, that you have funds in that account. And as soon as you walk in, it'll be activated. So it's a trend that we really see picking up. But building on Margaret's point earlier of, newcomer packages, that's an area where we see a tremendous amount of opportunity as well. With better data, you can approve more people. With better data, you can improve your line assignment logic. So how much line do you actually give? And you can also open up a variety of digital channels, allowing people to get approved for accounts without having to wait in line at a branch.
Jason, what role does the government play here? What more, if you could snap your fingers and have the government innovate or change what they do as it relates to onboarding newcomers to this new world, what would be some of the things on your wish list?
So I think the government would get more actively engaged in helping get access to and integrate in the foreign country data that's available on the consumers. They're, I think, sometimes a little bit over their skis with the rate of immigration that they're generating in Canada, which, while it's great for those folks being able to come to such an amazing country, and it's certainly good for our economy and our population growth, I do worry a little bit that the infrastructure is a little bit behind, and it's not necessarily fair to folks that come in and find the kinds of challenges we're talking about. I think the government could do a lot more to work with their foreign counterparts to say, how do we create some more, a better data exchange, so that, contrary to, as Misha said, when they get here, they're not starting from a blank slate with just zero history and zero file. It would give lenders and all financial institutions the ability to then see the person's identity, get even a little bit of information, assets, liabilities, credit information, work history, something that would make it easier for them to expedite that integration. To have that happen, there's some great businesses that are trying to find creative and innovative ways to do that, but the government has a lot more capacity and could be a lot more quick on the draw with it.
And Tonie, the chief has a pretty good line of sight into some of this country's largest employers, given how many employers you partner with. One of the phrases that you use is the curb cut theory. Tell us about what that theory is, and what would be an example or two of what best-in-class employers are doing to apply that theory.
So thanks, Bruce. The curb cut theory is actually based on how modern sidewalks and roads work. When you think about crossing a sidewalk to get to the other side of the road, the curb is actually cut so that it can accommodate easy transition from sidewalks to roads. It was done originally for wheelchairs. And the reality is, when you make it easier for those in wheelchairs, you're also all of a sudden making it easier for a range of other individuals who might have mobility challenges. They might be in crutches, they might have walkers, they might be pushing baby carriages or carrying grocery carts. So by doing one thing, you often have a ripple effect that advantages many. So by creating this welcoming culture, this environment that allows everyone to belong, you are creating a vibrant workforce. And I think Jason talked a little bit about this. When you look at a consumer base, just in the GTA alone, I think 56% of the population is from a visible minority group. So the reality is, they are actually looking for representation in people who they do business with. Who's the biggest population group in the workforce right now? Millennials. They are looking to actually support organizations whose values reflect theirs. And diversity and inclusion is a big part of that. So getting that piece right, super important. Simple example is recognizing that some individuals will actually need to take breaks throughout the day to be able to have prayers, observe in a quiet space, make those spaces available, provide people with the flexibility that they need to actually do that, and then come back to work and pick up where they left off, but giving them the opportunity to reflect and take those times that they need throughout the day.
Misha, you advocate something you phrased as a dedicated strategy on a new to country or new to Canada segment, a segment of the population. We've got a lot of people dialed into this event who hold senior roles in organizations with, I'm sure, varying levels of sophistication on this particular strategic question. What, in your view, would exemplify a solid strategy when it comes to the new to country segment?
Use more data. It's that simple. if
Can you give us some examples of what the data would be that you would say organizations should really look at?
I'll try to humor everyone and say underwriting and providing credit to newcomers without data is like trying to drive in the snow without snow tires.
Thank you for humoring us. That is a resonant example from coast to coast to coast.
I mean, to give you a very specific example, I mean, if someone just moved to Canada from Nigeria, to build on Margaret's example from a few decades ago, they no longer have to arrive without any history, right? We have connections in Nigeria. There are multiple credit bureaus in Nigeria. Those credit bureaus are reputable now, and the people that have the means to move to Canada tend to be the same people that have had experience with financial services before. And so you can now look at the past borrowing behavior of those consumers from reputable credit bureaus and be able to treat newcomers the same way you would any Canadian, by relying on their data and providing a more clear and fair underwriting decision.
Time is flying, and it is now time for us to wrap up with our last kind of section, and I call it the last word. So this is the one thing that you felt like, I can't believe we didn't get to this. We should have got to this. It could be a hope for the future. It could be a request, a call to action for government, for banks, for whomever, to do something different for this demographic. And Jason, I'm going to begin with you. This is like a minute, maybe a little bit more than that. What is your last word on this topic of financial well-being and newcomers to Canada?
Well, since I've already made my bold statement about the need for more government involvement and support to help new Canadians get settled into the country and doing more to drive the access to the kind of data that Misha referred to make it easier on their adaptation to the financial system, I'll pivot back over to the other topic we were discussing, which is, as an employer, how do you create better points of integration into your company culture? When I mentioned earlier about 17% of our workforce, or 400 employees, are new Canadians, I misspoke. I said they are permanent residents. Those are actually the number of people we have on work permits. So they haven't even got to permanent residency yet. So it's a significant number of them. About a year or two, we were trying to unpack what was causing some of the turnover and those people, once they spent time in our business, to leave. And we identified that one of the most common reasons was that, particularly for the younger demographic, when they're new to Canada, after somewhere between 1 to 2 years, they want to be able to travel home again. And they don't want to go for just the 1 week of vacation that they're entitled to at that point in their employment. They want to be able to go home for 2, 3, 4, sometimes 6 weeks, to be able to go back and spend a full month with their family back in their home country. And so, knowing that they didn't have that amount of accrued vacation time in our traditional Canadian system, they would have to quit their job. And we found there were a lot of folks that were quitting their jobs so they could travel home again. So we developed a new Canadian employee program that allowed them to, with advance notice to us, apply for and receive a much earlier sabbatical period than they would otherwise normally be entitled to under our typical sabbatical program that's based on tenure, so they could qualify for the month off that they needed to be able to go back and visit home. And by doing that, we were able to massively increase the retention of the new Canadians we had within our workforce. They would come back after that month away, rejoin our organization. And as Margaret said, that kind of stuff really does dramatically increase the loyalty to your organization. So the last word I would have is, think about all of your customary traditional employment programs, benefits, and perks, and say, if you really want to attract the new Canadian and make them a meaningful part of your workforce, how do you break the mold and do something new and creative that makes sense for them?
Tonie, minute or less, what's your last word?
Leverage the programs government does spend on. Talk to organizations like ACHÄV. We've got an incredibly innovative program on an incentive bond that actually will reimburse employers for parts of salary and their training dollars if they bring in a skilled worker and it doesn't work out. We offer career loans. We do apprenticeship programs. We work on short-term placements for newcomers. So there actually is a lot going on, and this community that I belong to, service providers, continue to try and do all we can to promote, but sometimes our voices aren't as strong as they could be. So take advantage, explore, give us a call.
Margaret, what is your last word?
Thank you. Honestly, I feel like Jason, Tonie, and myself, no offense, Michelle needs to create a governing body for Newcomers Finance. Maybe Michelle with the data as well. Thank you so much, Jason, for what you do. It's amazing. What I would say is cultural fit, and a lot of what Jason said earlier, cultural fit is the big issue within the immigrant community and newcomers. And another piece that I think, and I wish we could focus on, is the microfinance space. I tell you, don't know how far 1,600 goes to a family that will lend when they just arrive to Canada. We have a lot of requests that we cannot even fulfill. We have backlog assisted learning centers that we can't fulfill. So I think the microfinance piece is one that we need to talk about quite well, and cultural fit is a huge one. So thank you, Jason and Tonie. Misha.
Thank you, Margaret. Misha, what is your last word? And you get to be the last of the last word.
I'm flattered. I'll leave you with 3 thoughts, 3 points. One, there is no segment more important to Canada than the newcomer segment. You look at all the macroeconomic statistics. You can look at, the percentage of Toronto and the GTA that's foreign born, which I think is over 60% of the greater Toronto area is foreign born. There's no segment more important in figuring out how to serve than this one. 2 is Canada is going through a step change in its ability and the data available to serve this segment. I think we are a key driver of that, and the availability of this information is going to make all financial institutions in Canada more competitive and more able to serve this segment. And then 3 is you don't have to be alone. You can reach out to myself, some of the panelists here, in figuring out how to upgrade your newcomer strategies. There are people who specialize in this, who've helped some of the biggest banks in the world. I mean, we've supported Scotiabank, American Express, HSBC, Verizon in helping develop dedicated newcomer strategies. And so don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you to our panelists. I am emboldened, I am inspired, and I am energized by the collective work that all of you are doing in various ways across the country. And with that, Shizan, I will pass it back to you.
Thanks so much. What a great conversation. Margaret, Tonie, Misha, and Jason, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Your personal stories, ideas, and perspectives, and the work that your organizations are doing to help new Canadians establish their financial footing is really inspiring. And to Bruce, thank you as always for your expert moderation. We always enjoy having you back at the club. Members and guests, thank you for spending your lunch hour with us today. Enjoy your week, everyone.